Hello and welcome to another Out of Spec Reviews video. Welcome to the inside of the Hummer EV. This is the pickup version, also the Edition 1, which means it's one of the first ones ever built. This is VIN like 67 or 68. And what I'm gonna do is my typical in-depth driving review. These are the videos I love the most because A, I love to drive, I love to evaluate vehicles, handling dynamics, powertrain characteristics, all of this nitty gritty. And this Hummer EV offers an experience that you cannot get anywhere else. On one hand, you have, sort of a badass super truck with 1,000 horsepower that just seems so cool and people are really into it. And then on the other hand, you have sort of the efficiency-minded viewer of ours that is like, stop posting Hummer EV content because it's inefficient and doesn't help anything. But I'm in the camp of, this is a showcase of what you can do with electric. It's really cool. No secret, I love this thing. I've been telling you every video. I think it's truly a engineering marvel, honestly, what they were able to make this thing do for how much it weighs. And it's just a really cool showcase of the Ultium platform. I think we'll see more sensible versions of this, of course, with Lyric, of course, with Silverado and Sierra EV. That's going to be really exciting. I can't wait to review those to you probably in the coming year. Just a lot of cool stuff to get into with the Hummer EV. So as usual, I'm going to start by giving you all of the specs. I'm going to walk you through suspension, drivetrain, sizing, rear steer, and then we're going to go out, drive it in the city, drive it on the highway, and then probably the most hilarious side of this is we're going to take this into the canyons and see if it has any performance cred, which I don't think it will, but it'll be kind of interesting to see if this thing wants to turn. So join me for a very long, nerdy, in-depth driving review of the Hummer EV. I want to start by saying that there's no off-roading in this particular video. I always take the off-road portions of all SUVs or trucks in this case, and those are posted on our Out of Spec Overlanding channel. So if you haven't taken a look at the off-road performance of this, go do that. I'll touch on some off-roading things, but I have a whole almost half-hour long video dedicated just to rock climbing, sliding around in the dirt, and the rear virtual axle locker, the front physical mechanical locker, and I'll touch on all those things here. So let's talk about what we're in, what we're driving, and how it's all placed. First of all, this thing is huge, no question. I parked it next to my Rivian the other day. I even shot a little Rivian versus Hummer comparison, and it was just a quick answering your viewer comments. I sort of don't have too much time because I'm just about to jump on a plane to Oslo in a few hours. So I'm literally getting through this video and then running to the airport. Whole bunch of Norwegian EV stuff to come on this channel. But let's talk about what we have. We have a 9,000 pound sort of lifestyle truck, if you will. It's more of a big, bad, this thing's awesome. It's got a front trunk. The roof comes off. It's a convertible. It's got 765 kilowatt output, which is 1,040 horsepower, but I think the battery might be the limitation. It brings it down to 1,000 horsepower. So so much going on here. We have 213 kilowatt hours usable. That's what I was able to pull out of the battery pack, plus or minus. Some people are saying that the gross capacity is likely around 220 kilowatt hours. If you look at the cell chemistry and diagrams, my friend News Coulomb did some calculations, and so a big shout out to Eric if you don't follow his channel. Very knowledgeable, especially on the EV, on the GM side of electric stuff, so always reference his data for sure. There's also another great commenter you'll probably see in here is the username Nebula, really knowledgeable and helped me understand some more technical aspects of the Hummer EV. So thanks to our community for helping educate me on this as well. Even though I'm already pretty nerdy, I don't take the time to learn every single platform as in depth as I should because I have to cover everything. So a huge shout out to those guys. I think, yeah, right around 220 kilowatt hour usable gross capacity seems pretty reasonable. Charging is insane, 360 plus kilowatt charging. Peak, it's holding even over 250 kilowatts beyond 60%. I want to say a huge thank you to Magna for sponsoring this video. Guys, every week I thought it'd be pretty cool to highlight a specific Magna innovation, and in this case I want to talk about seats. Now, seats may not sound that interesting, but Magna's actually developed a really cool technology called freeform. Now, traditionally seat covers need to be stitched and sewed and hooked and looped in certain places whenever you want to tie down the material or have some sort of concave surface. But with a new innovation called freeform, the material itself can actually be molded to whatever shape you'd like. For example, take a look at this diamond pattern. When have you ever seen a fully embossed diamond pattern with no stitching? It's crazy. It's going to lead to the next generation of interior materials. I've actually even had a chance to try this out. And what's even crazier is the seat structure was the same as the factory OE spec. Freeform allowed the entire seat to feel and mold differently than the original seat. It was really crazy. Take a look at my reaction here. Let's see how this all... Okay, totally different, first of all. But it's the same seat structure.
It's the guts of the seat the production seat.
Whoa, totally different. So a huge thank you to Magna for sponsoring this video. We'll have a full in-depth video with Magna seating specifically on freeform coming to this channel very soon. I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you. The 65 to 100% charging curve is a little weird in the sense that it dips around 80% to 85%. I mean, I've seen as low as 13 kilowatts at 85%. Then it rockets back up, but I've seen that behavior over and over and over again. So there's definitely still some work here to do on the charging side, but if you're gonna go on a road trip, my recommendation is to charge it from 0 to 60% and then head to the next charging station. This thing's optimized for big power down low. What's also interesting about that is nominally the pack's only 350 volts plus or minus. When you plug it into a DC fast charger, it actually takes the top layer of the pack and the bottom layer of the pack. This is the 24 module pack, and it puts them into series from parallel. So it essentially doubles the operating voltage of the battery system. What that means is for the same amount of current at a DC fast charger, 500 amps in this case, you can charge twice as fast, which is great. So what's cool is you plug it in. I do notice that the handshake communication time takes an extra few seconds while the car goes ka-chunk, 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 and then you'll hear contactors going, and then magically it's in 800 volt. What's amazing is that they were able to even engineer that 400 to 800 volt switch, because what's interesting is you would think, okay, the reason of doing that, by the way, just to explain, this is built on the Ultium platform, which means they're using the same permanent magnet motors that are going to go in other vehicles like the Lyriq, etc., that are only 400 volt system architectures. So under normal driving, the drivetrain stuff, inverters, all of these things are 400 volt or probably 600 volt capable devices that can't operate at very high voltage. On the double stack batteries, they need the fast charging, but that's really the only benefit of high voltage. Some efficiency, of course, but it's very minor. And so I think it's a pretty genius thing to just double stack the battery. But what's wild about it is they must have a DC to DC booster up and down, because they still have to run their air conditioning compressor, same compressor, that has to operate in 400 and 800 volt, and their 12 volt booster. I mean, it's just like, there's still some other complexities here other than shutting off the 400 volt stuff and just going 800 volts. So I'm really impressed with that, and I'm impressed with how seamless it is and how it works every time, and it hasn't given me any issue at all. I also love how GM really understands what drivers need out of electric vehicles. Fantastic on-route planning, so it will, route you through charging stations. There's a manual preconditioning setting, which is great. And so they recommend start conditioning about 30 minutes before DC fast charging to warm the battery. I would actually say this vehicle doesn't need that much preconditioning, and I would advise you not to do it unless it's icy cold. I'll talk about that in the charging video, but it actually does overheat a little bit, or some components do. I'm actually preconditioning the battery right now because when I do watts to freedom, I want ultimate acceleration. I also want to see if we get into a thermal limitation driving in the canyons, but since it was 10 degrees last night and it's 34 degrees right now at about 10 a.m., I don't think we're going to overheat this thing. Okay, so there's your battery systems, just massive. Charging's crazy. We have 3 255 kilowatt motors. They're the same permanent magnet motors front and rear. Front motor is pretty simple. It's one motor, one differential, mechanical locking differential, 13.3 to 1 gear ratio on the front, 10.5 to 1 on the two motors in the rear. Two motors share the same gearbox housing in the back, but they operate independently of each other. And one of the problems with that, in my opinion, there's positives and negatives. I guess the positives, let's start with that, is you have individual control over each rear wheel with software, which means that if you want to slide the vehicle, virtually you can overdrive the outside wheel, just like Rivian does as well, and other torque vectoring systems, some do it mechanically, and that helps it, rotate into a corner. You can also do regen-based torque vectoring, which is pretty cool, and I think GM went pretty hard into all of that stuff, because it really is incredible what this thing can do. But the downside is you don't get a physical mechanical locking differential. You can pair two motors with it. This just doesn't have it. It has a virtual locker, which tries to tie right wheel speed to left wheel speed in an off-roading situation. And to be totally honest, that does not work. It does something, but it's not a locker. And I wish they didn't brand it as a locker, because if you watch our overlanding video, you'll see one tire spinning and I have to go pretty much full throttle to get enough power to get the other one to match wheel speed, especially with varying conditions on a split mu surface. It's really hard for it to keep up. I don't think that was the right decision. But they have, because it's Ultium, specific electric motors that they needed to use to reach the power output target of 1,000 horsepower here, 0 to 60 in 3 seconds in WTF mode. So very impressive there. I guess I'll talk about suspension really quick. There's 4 suspension heights. There's entry, exit, normal, increased, and extract. You can drive it in increased suspension all the time, which I actually do sometimes because it really accentuates the body movements, and I think it's really fun. Plus I think it looks pretty, it's a truck, you got to be a bit of an idiot in it, right? So I jack it up. I think it looks great. Extract mode is really neat. Only works in the terrain off-road settings. So there's 2 off-road settings. There's one for off-road, which is like Baja, send the tail out, go send this thing, have some fun. And then there's terrain, which is rock crawl, water fording. What terrain does is that's like really only use that system off-road, because it actually keeps the physical brakes pretty much engaged all the time, because when you do one pedal driving, it's not using the motors to really slow you down. It's almost doing no regen. It's blending friction brakes for instant response. Oh man, this is not good. When you blend friction brakes off of the accelerator pedal, you get increased braking performance, so harder brakes at lower speed, which is great. And it works pretty well, and it lets you 2-foot as well. So if you want even more physical brake pressure and then to push through with the accelerator pedal, just helps control the body movements of this thing. And I talk about that in our out of spec overlanding video. Okay, so suspension, there's a 5th mode that's claimed, but I've never seen the truck go into it, and that's the aero ride height. And I've seen no indication of this thing lowering on the highway. It's possible it's doing it and it's just not showing me, but pretty much the lowest you can drive at speed on the highway is just normal ride height. Entry, exit, you can have it so when you put it in park, it'll kneel down. That's a nice feature. But with this one having rock slider / running boards, I just keep it in normal. I don't like it going up and down all the time. The air suspension system seems to be so much more robust than Rivian. I have not overheated the compressor here, and I've been going up and down and up and down. I'm sure there's a limit somewhere, but I just haven't hit it. I'm going to talk about all the different accelerator pedal drive modes, all the low speed stuff in a second, but what I want to do is show you rear steer first. So everything right now is in key up settings. I'm actually going to put it into normal drive mode. I've configured the my mode setting to use the terrain steering, which is a little bit lighter steering, and the terrain sound profile, which shuts off all of the, or at least most of the piped in sound. I'm not a fan of fake sound, so I like that GM lets me configure that here in the Hummer. But what I want to do is talk about rear steer. So there's 3 modes of rear steer. There's auto, or is it on? It's rear wheel steer off, auto, and crab walk. Crab walk's amazing. I've been doing it all the time. It's the most hilarious thing ever. So let's start with rear wheel steer off. And so what that means is the rear wheels will be locked in a straightforward position. This I use more than you would think. If you're up against a curb or if you're pulling out of a charging station backed into Electrify America, the last thing you want is the tail swing to come around. And this thing, because it'll go, I think, over 10 degrees, almost 13 degrees of rear wheel steer, it's the most that I've ever experienced. More than EQS, it feels like to me. I know at least crab walk goes to 10 degrees, but I think auto goes farther. You don't want the tail swing to come and smack into the car next to you. And so I find that I turn off rear steer a lot for parking lot maneuvering, things like that. And then I just, kick a button and it goes right back to auto and we're good. The rear steer sometimes takes a little bit of time to catch up to what's going on. And that also is dependent on your drive mode. Normal has the most relaxed drive mode, or relaxed rear steering. Off-road increases it, and then terrain goes all the way to 1.3 degrees to 1 of input, on that rear axle. So it's really rear steer heavy, actually more rear steer than front steer in terrain mode. But you really need to be careful of that tail swing in this mode. So I'm going to go and make a U-turn or a full circle with rear steer off just to show you how it naturally turns, which I forget the exact turning radius on it, but it's not bad. Like the front wheels have pretty big articulation, or I should say angle of attack here, but we pretty much can make it and we're back to where we started. Okay, great. Now I'm going to put rear steer on the automatic setting, and I'm going to dry steer it all the way just for a second so the rear wheels can go. It's not good for the system. I don't recommend doing it, but now let me just show you how well this thing turns. We were almost all the way on the other end of the road there, and now we have barely even touched those lane marking lines. I mean, just an insanely tight turning radius. It's pretty incredible how much that shaves off. I mean, night and day difference. What's crazy is I got into my Rivian, which is a much smaller truck, after driving this, and that felt hard to maneuver. So don't let the size of the Hummer intimidate you. Alyssa's been driving this like just around, and she's like, I love this thing, we should get one. It's not hard to maneuver. You have pretty good sight lines, and the seating position's wonderful. You can sit nice and low in the cabin. You get this small windshield that you look out. I really like everything here. No blind spots really, except for the cars that are below you, which is a new experience because the doors are so high. Especially on the passenger side, it's sometimes hard to see cars down there. And I noticed that the blind spot monitoring really only works for cars that are behind you. So there is a blind spot on the right side when cars are right next to you, small cars that are low. So just be mindful as to what's around you. I'm going to put it into crab walk mode now because this is my favorite mode. I don't like how you have to get into crab walk. You have to push and hold until this graphic goes. And normally it makes a little sound, but it didn't make a sound. And it could just be because I have the audio on mute. I have some of the cameras going now at the moment, which I don't, actually you should be able to see them here. But let me show you that. So crab walk works up to 10 degrees and up to about 30 miles an hour. But it actually works better at lower speed. I find about between 0 and 10 is when it works great. So this is about as much steering input as you can put in before the front axle overcomes the 10 degrees of rear axle. So you can see it takes a little bit. Sometimes you got to reposition the front, and then you can just drive sideways, which is the coolest freaking feeling ever. What's even crazier about going sideways in front, you may ask, what's the point of crab walk? You just experience it. It's just everyone I put in this vehicle, I show it to, I drive around streets like this, and it's a mind warp. It's really cool. But what's weird is when you want to go backwards in crab walk, you go the opposite way on the wheel than you wanted to. So for example, I'm turning as if I would go that way, but I'm actually heading closer to the left side here. And it's just a very awkward feeling that everything is in reverse when you crab walk backwards. So, and you can see all those people in the car like, what the heck is going on with that thing? They're literally stopping. I mean, it really freaks people out. It's great. So I love everything about this crab walk function. And honestly, the point of the Hummer is to have fun. It's a supercar, but it's a truck. So it's like not meant to be practical, not meant to like do anything, I would say, that fits normally into lives, although it does, but it's just a showcase of like, here's how crazy we can be. And I'm really happy GM went all out here. Also, what's the top speed in reverse? 25 miles an hour backwards. feels like a lot. So 25 miles an hour backwards in the Hummer EV. That's pretty cool. Neato. So let's talk about forward driving. We'll get into our city driving review now. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull up the drive setting. By the way, I do have one pedal driving on. There should be a setting. I just want to see if I can find it really quick. There should be a setting that allows one pedal on and off. If I go into vehicle settings, one pedal driving, here we go, off, on, or high. So 3 settings for one pedal drive. Let's break these down really quick. Off should basically, when I come to a stop, no auto hold here. It just creeps, very slowly creeps, but increasing speed to 3 mile an hour target creep speed, 4 mile an hour. And then I can hit the brakes and we come to a stop. Pretty easy. So that's just creep. If I put the vehicle then into L, it still creeps in L mode with one pedal driving off. And if I pull the regen paddle, it will come all the way to a stop and hold you there. So this is the regen paddle, similar to Hyundai Kona, Hyundai Ioniq 5, Bolt. Volt, I think, had it as well. Volt had a really cool pedestrian horn, by the way, which was pretty neat. That's the topic for another video. But the nice thing about the regen paddle is it comes to a stop here. What I don't know is if the brake lights are on or off. I think they're on, would be my guess. That came after some software glitches with Bolt. Anytime you come to a stop, it should be on. So, cool. I don't drive it with one pedal driving off. I drive it in one pedal driving on. Not high, surprisingly. But let me show you how one pedal driving on works. I'm going to tip into the throttle. Really nice throttle ramp. I love the throttle tuning on this. I'm going to lift off completely. Big hit of regen. And then it comes off at about 1 mile an hour to the perfect, smoothest stop you can imagine. Next level, one pedal driving. You know, this is just, they got it. Similar to BMW, similar to Tesla. Nice job, GMC. You got this down perfectly. What I also want to explain is that there's other ways to increase regen off of just that one pedal driving. So that's probably the weakest form of it at that point. I'm just going to move over for this Volvo guy here. And what happens here is I'm in drive. If I put it in L and accelerate and I lift off, we get even more regen. And then it comes to a stop about the same after 2 miles an hour, but really good, really nice. So that's impressive. And that is actually how I drive the vehicle 99% of the time, in drive or L. L might actually have almost too much regen, but I'll explain this in a little bit more detail. On top of L, you can get even more regen. The reason I'm speeding up is to show you this. Is I'm gonna go here, I'm lifting off in drive, hitting L, getting even more, and then pulling the regen paddle and getting even more regen. So you have 3 increases of regen on top of drive, which is wonderful in one pedal drive mode. And if you touch the brake pedal, it actually blends in more friction or more regen before it blends friction brakes. So it's just the most amount of regen I've ever experienced from any vehicle. There's also, I mean, the most I've seen in this is 399 kilowatt regen indicated. So 400 kilowatts of regen, more than anything, by like 100 kilowatts plus. It's crazy. The other thing you can do is you can put it in one pedal driving high, which really hits the regen, just to show you no one's behind us. So coming to a stop, comes to a stop pretty quick, all the way down. There we are at 0. So the most aggressive one pedal driving is if you drive it in one pedal driving high, put the vehicle in L mode, it just is like in the dash and pull the regen paddle. These motors, because they're permanent magnet, generate such a force to low speed that it's pretty incredible, just this thing standing on the nose without even touching friction brakes. And that's good, because the friction brakes are not up to the task without regen. There's no, even GMC admits it. They say do not drive in the mountains with the Hummer EV if your charge is more than 80%. They recommend a maximum 80% charging limit every day. And if you go to 100%, there's a warning that says don't drive in the mountains because this thing needs regen to stop. And it's so touchy when you lift off the accelerator pedal with everything set to maximum regen. So what I'm actually going to do is put it into regen on and actually put it in D for a little less regen. And then what I do is if I need more, I can pull the regen paddle and I can pull the shifter back into L, and then I get all the regen I could ever need. I don't need any more than that, and it makes the accelerator pedal a little bit smoother, a little bit longer travel, and I prefer that. So here I am coming up a little bit quick. I'm gonna pull the regen paddle, and that's just gonna pull me down a little bit more to a stop, and then we're good. So that's how I drive it in the city from a powertrain standpoint. Wow, I know this is getting real nerd level 9000, but there's so many settings here to dial in the truck exactly how you want it to drive. And I really think it's the least intimidating big vehicle to drive because it's easy to place on the road. I can see everything. There's 360-degree cameras if you need it, cameras underneath. I haven't had any issue with this fitting anywhere, actually. And we live in a small town here in Colorado that actually has some like small alleyways and stuff, and I haven't had any issues yet. So cruising around the city in normal mode, you hear a lot of that piped in audio. So what I'm going to do is actually switch the truck back into my mode, which I've configured to turn off most of the audio by putting the sound in terrain mode and the steering in terrain mode, so it's a little bit lighter steering. What's interesting is even if you put steering in terrain mode, it doesn't put the rear steer to anything more aggressive than normal. So you still are stuck with the normal, I would say a little bit lazy rear steering, but it's also having to move those 35-inch Goodyear tires around, so that to me seems normal. Of course, from an acceleration standpoint, we'll do the full WTF mode, but just watch the hood on this thing stand up. It's just crazy, and then it comes down under braking. It's an amazing experience to drive this, and this is what I'm trying to explain to everyone is like, this is not your only car. Everyone who's buying a Hummer EV, or many people, this is like their third, fourth, or fifth vehicle. They're buying it because it's an experience. It's a super truck. It's just something else that something that doesn't exist anywhere else. And to accentuate the body movements, I actually raised the ride height into increased. And there's huge suspension travel here, almost 15 inches, 12 inches of suspension travel. What's cool about driving it in increased mode is the on-center pitch and pitch of the vehicle is increasing drastically and then decreasing drastically. So when you drive it in high, especially at low speed, it takes very little throttle input for you to feel the thing move around, and I really like that. So that is neat. Also, when it comes to like, I don't know, is there anything exciting going on here? Roundabouts and stuff, you can just drive straight over a roundabout. There you go. Around the city, it gets all the looks, all the attention. It's relatively easy to maneuver. It's just the next level vehicle in my opinion. So I'm really just so into this thing. And you know, look here, we're like in traffic, and it's not abnormally big when you compare it to like an F-250 or F-350 truck, and the rear steer makes it super easy to make these corners. The one thing is you hear wind noise, or at least I do in this one, with this sky roof starting at about 25 miles an hour. It starts making noise. And so the noise performance of this is pretty poor. The tire noise is very loud. It is not the quietest thing on the planet, but I don't think it needs to be. You know, there's certainly things I don't like about the Hummer EV, which I guess, what don't I like about this thing? It's just so cool. It's, you know, for me, it's like I forget to be somewhat critical of small things because it's just so crazy what GMC's been able to do with this thing and to make it drive as well as it does. I guess the one thing that I really don't like is the rear steering I wish I could choose the most aggressive rear steer for city driving, because sometimes I end up going a little bit farther out, putting a big steering input in quickly. That wakes the rear steer up, and then I can kind of pivot the truck around. But yeah, I mean, we got people looking at this thing everywhere right now, so it's just pretty crazy. Let's jump on the highway. I want to talk a little bit about Super Cruise, and then we'll get into a little bit more of the suspension stuff before we drive it in the canyons. I guess on the way to the highway, I should tell you about the suspension anyway, just because it's the damping system is pretty interesting. So what's interesting here with the suspension is we have an air component, so you have height adjustability, and then you also have active damping. And what's crazy is the damping control is really fast and makes a huge difference, and it's all controlled by software depending on what drive mode you're in. and they monitor, I guess, damper every 2 milliseconds. You have to remember, GM sort of invented mass market mag ride, and so magnetic ride control, and so this has like the generation 4 of that, and it's really, really good and responsive. What I thought was interesting was that they tuned it specifically for the Hummer EV. From an efficiency standpoint, they tuned the damper to basically pull no current cruising down the highway. So no current is full soft mode, which is how this thing floats down the highway, and it's really good. And then as soon as you put an input in, boom, it ramps up the damper to help control body motion, keep that tire on the ground, and also help with roll stiffness as well. And so I thought it was pretty neat that on something this relatively inefficient, the engineers went out of their way to tune efficiency for such a small component of the damper. So yeah, crazy. We'll talk about efficiency on the highway, and let's go cruise this thing, see how it does at about 70, 80, 85 miles an hour. Maybe we'll even hit top speed if we're feeling spicy. But pulling out here, even in increased suspension, half shafts are reinforced, so it doesn't give me full power super instantly. You can tell it's doing power limitation by suspension height, but it's still fast enough, and it still leans back, and I don't know. We're gonna put it back in a normal ride height, because that's when you unlock more power, and then full power is in WTF mode, which I'll show you later, and that's when the suspension's down and the half shafts are sort of at the best angle to just be smacked to give this thing full power. So here we are merging onto the highway, big power. Just, okay, we need to talk about that front axle situation when we get into the canyons, because it's an open diff when it's not locked, and it just sends the power everywhere, and you get massive torque steer, and just that tire spinning, that tire spinning. It's pretty funny. So yeah, let's get up to speed here. It's got plenty of power, obviously. 750 kilowatt output right there, almost 1,000 horsepower, just about, just whoa, gets right up. This thing produces maximum torque up to about 40 miles per hour. I think over 11,000 pound-feet at the tire, of course. So that's not a real fair measurement, but it sounds pretty cool when you mention it. So let's go 80 miles an hour, speed limit 75. I've got it locked in on cruise control. Before I talk about driver assistance, I want to talk about ride quality and noise. You can hear I'm screaming because this is one of the loudest vehicles I've tested in recent memory. The noise from the roof is crazy. Now this is a convertible truck, so what's cool is the whole rear window in the back, I just want to show you, that slides down, and you can take the roof off, and you can roll the windows down. So it's a real open air experience in the summertime. It's not that big of a problem, this noise, on a long trip, because it's got a pretty good sound system, so you can crank it up. It loves like a medium volume, but it doesn't love to be absolutely, you know, cranked up to 11, the sound system itself. In terms of ride comfort, amazing. This thing is so heavy, it feels like you just flatten the road. The cars behind us must have the smoothest experience, because all of these bumps, we are just plowing them down, and that's really the impression you get, even with tires set to 45 PSI, which is factory, 35-inch. Again, the Hummer can accept up to 37-inch tires without any modifications. My guess is GM wanted to do 37s, but they couldn't get it to fit within OE specs, so they had to go with the 35 for acceleration reasons or handling or whatever metric they needed to hit internally. My guess is they wanted 37s. So ride comfort, amazing. You don't feel a thing. I wish it had massaging seats. The Sierra Denali Ultimates have massaging seats. The Hummer EV Edition 1 should have massaging seats, in my opinion. But, you know, whatever. Let's do driver assistance. So we're on Super Cruise, and I would have loved to do a full hogback driver assistance review on this thing. I won't be able to. Perhaps Max can. We'll see if he wants to do it. But here we are, just sitting on Super Cruise, hands-free, eye tracking, sensors here, and you can see it's automatically changing lanes. I didn't touch anything because of the truck we're coming up to. Super Cruise rocks on pre-mapped highways. And there are some downsides as well, but let me start with the positives that I really like. The perfect lane tracking. There's no wobble in the lane. It stays dead straight. I don't even think about it. It automatically makes a lane change when I want it to, and it'll even go back to the right lane, assuming maybe this guy's going a little bit too slow for it. And then it always goes back to not the passing lane, basically. On a 3-lane highway, it goes to center. On a 2-lane highway, it goes to the right lane. I think we're set just a little bit faster, so it won't move over. But what's also cool is it vibrates the left and right side of my seat to let me know which direction it's about to change. I can also ask for a manual lane change just by hitting the stalk right here on the side. So let's bump the speed up to 85. 85 is the maximum speed you can go on Super Cruise. 100 miles an hour is the fastest you can go on normal cruise control, and 106 miles an hour is the vehicle's top speed, which I won't show you that top speed, but I just want to show you the 80 acceleration. So boom, 80, 9, 10, and 10.6. Boom. Crazy how fast this thing gets up to speed. Regen wise, still doing 120 plus kilowatt regen, even at about 80% state of charge. When you get lower in the battery pack, of course, you can accept even more regen, and that's when it gets pretty freaking spicy. Pretty cool. So cruise control back on Super Cruise. The other thing that Super Cruise does a really good job at is actually moving over for vehicles coming on the on-ramp. So Super Cruise always prioritizes driving in the right lane on a 2-lane highway, but if it sees someone coming down an on-ramp, it's crazy. It will automatically just move over for them. So that's really impressive. I'm just blown away by that technology. The other thing that I like is if you're passing another vehicle and it wants to move back to the right and there's not enough room, and here, look, it's auto lane changing. It's knifing its way through traffic right now. The Hummer will actually speed up to 2 miles an hour faster than you have set to put some gap between you and the car and then move back over. It's a very natural feeling. It just speeds up a little bit if it's going a bit too slow of a pass, or if the vehicle's in its blind spot and it wants to move over, it'll just zip up, move over, and then go back to its normal speed just so it's not cutting people off. Really love the tuning here. Some things I don't like. I don't like the driver takeover request. There's no beeps. You only know to take over because the seat vibrates and this goes red. I wish there was an auditory component. If you are curious about all the nitty-gritty of that, I did a whole video on Super Cruise in our Hogback series. I'll leave a link in the description and you can watch that. That was with the Sierra Denali Ultimate combustion truck, but it had Super Cruise, same system. And the other thing I don't like is when it asks you to actually take over the vehicle, like when it loses mapping data, it cuts all acceleration. Even if I'm touching the accelerator pedal, it doesn't respond to my input for about a 1 Mississippi. And then my foot's pretty hard on the, and it doesn't know we're getting off here, so I'm gonna cancel the system. Here we are, Super Cruise disengaging. I was hard throttle and you can see it peaked up on acceleration. I just wish it would respond to throttle all the time, no matter what the input is. Because what happens is it ignores throttle request. You go harder down, you start slowing down, and then it goes, okay, disengagement over, boom, full hard throttle. And it's really unnatural, and I think actually one of the most annoying bits of using this system is the driver takeover. A lot of systems struggle with the throttle tuning in a driver takeover situation. So let's kind of hustle it through here. To the left, we're going to get back on the highway. We're going to go wide open throttle down the on-ramp to the highway. Oh, maybe not, because there might be some traffic. But yeah, just want to show you the acceleration in normal mode, and then we're going to do some launches in WTF Watts to Freedom mode for the start of the canyons. You'll notice here is where we do all of our range testing. So just going to come to a quick stop and just floor it. Pretty soft launch with suspension in normal. It has these power dips. Now we're at ramping up. It doesn't give full power. Actually, the whole time we didn't see 700 kilowatts. So it's very sensitive as to when it gives you maximum acceleration. And I think it all has to do with suspension angle and protecting the half shafts. Of course, battery temperature has a bit to do with it, but we've already seen 750 kilowatts out of it. So yeah, I would say that a lot of the full power has to do with that front half shaft just being full extend when you're pitched all the way up. And I think that's why WTF mode slams the vehicle to try and get the most amount of acceleration possible, with the suspension being as low down as it can be. So that is pretty good acceleration in normal mode. I also feel it hitting some limitations throughout the curve. It like gives you power, it has a dip, and then it gives you a big wave of power, and then it dips. And so it's not a smooth, constant acceleration curve. and it's totally variable. Every time you floor it, you're like, what am I gonna get this time? Is it gonna be fast? Is it gonna be slow? I don't know. And to me, it's kind of exciting, and because it's fun. It encourages me to drive it harder, which is not good for efficiency. Just in this drive alone, which you've seen how we've driven all day today, we've gotten 0.9 miles per kilowatt hour. Couple accelerations, but nothing crazy. I mean, not the most efficient thing on the planet here. Probably the least efficient vehicle, electric vehicle you can buy. But yeah, so it says unable to change lanes, probably because that guy was a little bit too close. So I'll manually change lanes, kick it back on Super Cruise. Now let's go talk about, unavailable, I'm taking control. You gotta let it time out. Now I'm back on Super Cruise. Let's go hit the canyons and see if this thing has any performance credentials whatsoever. It'll be kind of funny to find out. So I was just talking about that plateauing where it felt to me that the front motor was letting off. So I pulled up this screen just here, just thought this would be kind of cool to show you. This shows us how much power is coming from each axle at any current time. So I'm gonna go from about 25 miles an hour to full throttle. You'll watch the front motor hit, and then what it feels like to me is it pulls back. Let's see what happens. So full power. As soon as the suspension maxes out, you can see it really kicks off the front motor. So that's why WTF really lowers this thing, and it feels totally linked to suspension angle. If you take a look here as well, I'll do the same thing, 25 miles an hour, full throttle. You'll see the suspension expand, and then it cuts all the power there. So definitely like a half shaft preservation situation is my guess. So pretty neat about that half shaft situation. I like finding that. Got some cool moo-moos over here. Hello. They're looking pretty happy. So yeah, just on a little dirt road, I thought it'd be kind of fun to do a full acceleration, deceleration here, sort of in the dirt. I don't know, may as well try it. So let's go WTF mode in the dirt, and then I think we'll launch it on pavement as well. So to go quickly into Watts to Freedom, you just double click the traction control button, which doesn't always work. Oh wait, it's a little bit buggy to get in there. Let's do it again. 1, 2, there we go. My seat vibrates. I have to say truck will lower, check surroundings, vehicle lowering. And so the reason it's lowering really is to get, again, all the half shafts in line so it can just smack the power. I've been preconditioning the battery so it's warm. Actually, right after we do Watts to Freedom, I'll turn off preconditioning. That way we get the most amount of thermal longevity. Cruising. It says Watts to Freedom armed. I've never launched it on dirt. Let's see what happens. Full brake pressure achieved. Floor it with the right. It says release brake. It just roasts all 4 tires. It doesn't even give full torque because it just can't get the power down. Braking. It actually got tire squeal on dirt there. That was crazy. So this thing absolutely rocks. And what's cool is we can actually seemingly keep it in Watts to Freedom mode right here. I wonder how long it will stay in. I've never tried just driving it in Watts to Freedom. The noises are loud. Maybe we should drive canyons in WTF mode. I don't know. The suspension's definitely lowered. Handle's better. Wow, big brakes. Oh, if this thing stays in WTF mode, then okay, like this might actually be a good performer. I'm shocked. But here we go. Let's launch it, shall we? Coming to a stop. Stand by, armed. Brake to the floor. Floor it with the right. Full launch. Let's do it. Just so fast. And then it cuts torque down at about 75 miles an hour. It just went down. It's crazy fast. Wow. So that's the Hummer EV thing. It's like what I've been doing when I put people in this thing is I say, all right, jump in. We're going to do a launch, and then we're going to do crab walk. And that's kind of about it. And it's pretty impressive. So let's turn off preconditioning now. So I'll go over here to energy, DC fast charging. Oh, it looks like it's already timed out and it's done. So battery's up to temp. Let's spin around, and I'm going to take it out of WTF mode just by clicking the traction control button if it catches it. There we go. Now we're out of WTF mode. It seems like we can actually drive the canyons in Watts to Freedom, which I did not expect. And so that would be like full canyon slammed mode. So we definitely have to try that. Nice rear steer. We can make a U-turn right here. This is great. And so I just love how this thing turns on a dime. It's amazing. So what I want to do is drive it in full normal mode in the canyons first to give you a sense of how it drives. And then we definitely need to try WTF mode cruising through, because that's very impressive. So What do we have for braking, suspension? What are the modes? How are we going to get this thing set up? Right now I have it in my mode, light steering, but suspension height is set to normal, which is what you can only go down to. Entry exit only works at low speed. Apparently WTF mode's a thing, learning as we go here. And yeah, the vehicle's wide, so we don't have much room in our lane. I always say we have to keep it between the mustard and the mayo. We're on public roads. We have to be safe. But we also need to see how this thing drives. We have 2 motors in the back, and we have 1 motor on an open diff up front. So what I'm going to be really curious about is coming out of these corners, are we going to feel torque vectoring, and will we get inside wheel spin on the front axle? And when you get inside wheel spin on something that weighs this much, that is this heavy of a wheel and tire package alone, that's a lot of inertia going on there, and you can see the suspension move around here. You can also see just how much steering input I'm having to make these corners. We're already getting tire squeal. What seems a bit weird to me about Hummer EV is that like the steering box itself is a little loose. And I'm not totally sure how the steering rack is set up in this, but definitely like sometimes after I make a right turn, in order to go straight, I have to keep, you know, the wheel stays to the right a little bit, and after a left turn, the wheel stays to the left a little bit, and I find I really have to put a lot of lock in. So there seems to be some slop in the steering. Certainly there's no steering feedback or feel whatsoever. You kind of just put in a request to the ship to turn in that direction. They think about it. The captain then wakes up, drives over to the office, jumps up to the bridge of the ship, and then we start to turn. I mean, it's just the amount of time between steering turn and vehicle actual body rope movement and turn is long compared to a sports car. Compared to other trucks though, this is actually pretty good. Nowhere near the level of Rivian. I mean, night and day, this versus Rivian. Rivian's way more performance oriented. We actually did get some rear axle help coming around the corner there. So like dynamically it's set up pretty nice. Please don't drive in our lane. So coming out of this corner, big power, just roasting inside front tire there. Lean it on the back axle, big power. You can see just how much steering lock I'm having to make. The whole front end is moving around because of torque steer. Oh, there goes some stuff. This must just look so silly to people on the outside. It's really a great vehicle to learn weight transfer in, body control, and tire movement, because you're basically transferring the maximum grip of the tire from acceleration out of a corner into lateral grip, into braking, and it's a very like simulator type thing. It really makes you, you know, think ahead. If you mess up a corner entry, there's no recovering this thing because it's so heavy. I'm just gonna back off traction control. Can I go full stability off? Let's see. So traction control, usually GM vehicles let you go stability off, but certain speeds, I don't know. So now I've turned everything off in a 9,000 pound Hummer EV. Seems like a bad idea. Just roasting tires coming out of corners. Just crazy, the weight of this thing, the way it stands on the nose. Again, really important that you go into a corner slow because this thing's heavy. There's no real stopping it. You got to get your set, and then you can apply power. It's just a big behemoth, just it's like a Baja truck, but it's controllable and easy, so I can get this thing right on the limit and I can ride the edge of that tire pretty much the whole way through a corner. So for me, zero worry. I can stuff this thing into a corner. I know exactly what it's going to do. I've had it in canyons up to this point. Stability control turned itself back on, so you can go traction control off at least, and I just know exactly what's going to happen. If I give it too much throttle too quickly, we're going to understeer because all the weight comes off the front. What you really need to do is hard on the brakes, get it into a corner, and then progressively roll onto the throttle and just treat it with respect, because that's what this thing needs. It's crazy. But what I'd like to do is put it in WTF mode and see how it handles then, because right now you're getting the full suspension movement. I mean, it's literally like being in a simulator and going, whoa, whoa, and it feels very video gamey, feels very engineered to be this way. And the suspension's incredible that it can maintain its composure with this much battery, this much weight. Thankfully, the battery is in the ground. So let me just there we go, into park. Uses a mechanical parking paw, as well as the parking brake in addition, only for emergency, or I should say hill situations. But I don't like that they spec'd a mechanical parking paw. I'm a fan of electronic parking brakes personally. All right, there we go. Everything's secured. Double click on traction control, WTF mode, vehicle will lower. Watts to freedom, baby. Just a crazy machine, isn't it? I mean, I've never driven anything like this. So vehicle lowering, let me just take it off of park so you can see definitely it was loaded up on the parking brake, just like every air suspension. Kinematics change as it drops. So it's dropping way low, really low. We're going pretty much down to the ground. So now it's armed. We're not going to launch it. We're just going to drive it in WTF mode and see what happens. Obviously the noises are piped in, but let's see if it feels weird or normal or what. Wow, so instantly the body motions are totally controlled. Wow, it feels hunkered to the ground, heavy, so much more grip. I can feel a lot more of the tire working rather than just the edge, so speeds are much higher. So this is how I would drive it. Can I drive it in L mode? Yes. Watts to freedom in max regen. Wow, this is the way to canyon carve. Okay. Did not know this was a feature. This is pretty freaking impressive. What we're going to do is do some acceleration and braking in WTF mode now and just see how it feels normally, and then we'll get up to the tight section of road, because this is, I'm definitely not going to say darty, but it certainly changes the entire character where, yep, it's heavy, but there's not much movement in the suspension. Nowhere near as hardcore as Rivian gets, but in terms of power, it definitely doesn't give you full power. 0.4 G's of acceleration at that speed. So it's not doing the full 1,200 pound-feet of torque that it's referencing here, but actually power might be that high. Torque could have just dropped. I thought that was kilowatts for a second. So yeah, it could still be giving full power. Feels fast as hell. It's crazy. And just like coming through these corners, wow, you can really put on some speed with this thing. Insane. What I want to do is a full braking test. So we usually do it from 60 miles an hour. So let's regen. There's 60 and full ABS brakes. Ready? Stops way TF mode than normally because, you know, the whole body motion is just controlled. The rear axle can really help with braking more. Plus it just sounds like a semi truck when you're coming, just great brake pedal feel. I can feel it clicking away with ABS, obviously brake by wire. Wow, I did not expect the Hummer EV to have this character. I thought like it wouldn't be able to turn. And I wish I knew about this. So when we shot the overlanding video, I went up another canyon that's in the area, and it was in normal mode, my mode. And I was just like everywhere, full sending this thing. The brakes were getting hot. It was awesome, but it was really soft and it wasn't fast. Here, look at the speed I can actually carry through some of these corners. I mean, that's not sports car levels, but not far off. So that's the cheat code right here. No one told me you could drive WTF mode in this thing. It's not worth doing a full canyon evaluation on, but like, if you're gonna go to a track day or you're gonna drive this thing hard, that's what you do. And I hope GM leaves this in the software, because it's actually, wow, I expected to just have giggles and like drive through the, drive off the road, put two wheels off and cut corners, which is what I was doing on the way to the off-roading thing. It's just like, oh, corners, I'm going straight through the woods. Wow, this is really not bad. Let's see if it still feels fast after giving it a lot of power and regen. Not that we were really that hard on it, to be honest, and it's cold outside. So here's another launch. Yep, good, definitely limiting. Yeah, definitely hitting some limits in the system here where it's not giving us full power. But still very impressive for what it is. I mean, this thing's not meant to really hustle up a back road that hard. But wow, I'm impressed with this WTF mode. I really like that. Let's flip around here just because I'm going to be late for my flight if I don't. I would love to do a track day in a Hummer EV. Who would like to see that? That would be hilarious. Wow, it's good. The steering sucks. Everything other than the steering, though, is really good lateral grip in this mode. It's amazing how much more of the tire you can use when you lower this thing out, because I was actually chunking a bit of the sidewalls driving up the other canyon, and I was like backing off because I'm like, oh, I feel like we're just like ripping knobs off of these tires, and we kind of were. Let me take it out of WTF mode now, and let's see what kind of power it gives us. So regen wise, you know, that's 200 kilowatt regen at 35 miles an hour, just to give you an impression of how much regen this thing does. You can see the suspension was aired all the way out, so now it's raising us back to middle. Very impressive suspension system here. The brakes are impressive as well from the booster, but I think the brakes themselves are a bit undersized. I wish they went with a real beefy, meaty setup, because they feel real beefy and meaty for like the first 3 hard stops, and then it's like, oh, okay, let's slow this sucker down. And you really want to make sure that this thing can regen all the time, because that's the safety backup. If you lose regen, really slow down. Don't rely on friction brakes in this. If the battery's frozen, for example, or something, just be mindful of the braking system, is my recommendation to you. This is not a beast we want to joke around with. As much fun as I'm having here and saying I'm joking around, I'm being extra cautious because of just the weight, the size, the heft, and then all of the millions of systems that honestly are pretty early production in this thing, but nothing's really faulted out on me yet. Looking like it's having a hard time raising that front left suspension back to normal ride height, at least at speed. Maybe down the straightaway. You can see like the steering wheel isn't straight on this one. I think this truck lived a hard life though. So let's let it, I don't like to drive it hard when it's adjusting suspension, so I'm letting it catch up, raise to where it wants to be. And I guess while it's doing that, I'm going to pull over here and just let you know a few more things about the Hummer, and then we'll have some fun on the way down and talk about braking and regen. And actually, this thing handles the best on the downhill, because that's when you can really help get the front tires in for turn-in. So let's just pull right here, not block anyone in really quick. Just want to check my notes and tell you some more things that I wrote down that I'd like to share with you about this. So let's see, 329 mile EPA range. I don't think I told you the price. $110,000 as spec, deal of the century. The battery pack, I've actually been to the factory where they make the battery pack at Magna. Our sponsor makes this battery, the enclosure. It's really cool, great process. And it's a structural component of the Hummer. So unlike F-150 Lightning where the battery sits in the frame rails, Magna also makes the F-150 Lightning battery pack enclosure. They do this one, and it's a structural component, so it's like bolted into the whole thing, and even with the sky roof, that helps with torsional rigidity, and it does feel pretty tight. Peak torque to 40 miles an hour, I mentioned that. 3 seconds 0 to 60. I don't think I told you that one. It has a tire deflation and inflation helper, so the tire pressures don't rely on speed, and it'll beep the horn when you get to a certain pressure. No onboard air compressor, but I do believe GMC is going to offer different accessories for this thing. Has a 2-foot water fording depth, crazy. 60% grades. It can go up or down in drive or reverse, which is insane. I did notice though, when you have it in extract mode, it only works to 12 miles an hour. That's suspension full high, and it gives you such little power. And I think, again, it's all half shaft protection in my opinion. Has the front mechanical electronic locker, which I couldn't get to lock in some previous videos, and I just wanted to try that out here really quick. So I have it in neutral. I have rear locker going. I have front locker. Won't go at all. Yep, I think there might be something wrong with the front locker on this thing. I'm going to move just because sometimes, you know, the mechanical lockers have to fall into the teeth, but I cannot get reverse, neutral. I can't get the front locker to engage no matter what I do. So that's a problem with this particular truck. I'm going to have to let GMC know it. It would have done better in our hill climb challenge, honestly. It was still the best thing we've ever tested, but it would have done better if we had a front locker available. Okay, what else? Heavy duty ball spline half shafts. They reduce the feedback and wobble to the driver. You don't get any half shaft wobble. And we also mentioned they do a lot of power based off of suspension angle. I told you it can accommodate up to 37-inch tires. It's got full cameras underneath. I showed you that off-roading. The ride control is really cool. And it can tow 7,500 pounds and 1,300 pounds of payload. Not much payload at all. By the time you put like 4 people in this thing, there's not much room left over to stay legal, and that's because this is so heavy. The 7,500 pound towing, again, if you put a 500 pound tongue weight on, that counts towards your payload. So it's not like the most work truck specky situation. I did not get to do any towing with it during my time. I didn't think many Hummer EV owners were going to use it as a tow rig. If I had more time with it, or if we get it again, I'd love to do some towing stories and compare it to Rivian and Lightning. I just literally, my schedule, we had the Hummer for a while. I just only had a few days to work with this. So every Hummer video you've seen, I've shot in like a 2 or 3 day period. That's why I'm wearing the same clothes over and over. Okay, we got to rush to make this flight. So hammer down the hill. We have it in normal mode. Big power, big regen right here. 200 kilowatt regen. Put it into L, even more. 200 peak is what we saw. That's pretty impressive. So overall, you really need the battery state of charge to be around like 10% to see that 400 kilowatt regen. Those Jeeps are probably heading off-roading, which is cool. Look at this chopped roof Mustang situation. That is so cool. A lot of car enthusiasts out today. We're not going to go too hard, but I hope that gives you an impression of how the Hummer drives. It is a wonderful machine in the fact that it is not for everyone. They aren't making many of these. It's an experience that you can't have anywhere else, and it's one that is impressive from an engineering side, from my perspective. Every time I drive this, I'm like, wow, how did the guys go this crazy to make it be able to do this? And especially from an off-roading perspective, they did a really nice job of tuning the suspension, tuning the driveline as best as possible with that virtual locker. It's better than Rivian's virtual locker, in my opinion. And you know, and then you get like a drift mode when you put it in off-road. You get a drift calculator, and it's just like light on the wheel, and we're just moving this monster truck down the road. For what it is, it's a very impressive vehicle. To have all of the inputs be this light, be this easy and approachable to drive for the normal person. It's almost a bit scary, if you will. I'm not one of those that's like, we need to outlaw this thing, it's dangerous. But it's like, just be mindful when you drive it, because the stopping distance, just to show you, takes a long time to stop, and that wasn't from a very high speed. So it's heavy, and especially on a downhill you feel that. So that's just my caution to you. If you're buying one of these or have one of these, always leave a little room on the table. Never go 10/10ths on the street or off-road, and just enjoy the way that it's calibrated, because you know, I've been saying for a long time that GM has made some of the best performance vehicles on the planet. They've developed some of the best technologies. For example, their performance traction management in Corvette and some spicy Camaros, that system's incredible. Their mag ride's incredible. They do some pretty incredible things over there, and this, I think, is the most impressive vehicle to come out of GM ever, in my opinion. And I'm lucky enough where I get to drive like ZR1s and crazy stuff. This can do so many things. I'm really impressed with the WTF mode in the Canyons too. Did not know that was a thing. So glad that's possible. It's also just fun to drive. It makes people smile. I thought everyone would be like, oh, look at this idiot driving this Hummer, you know, going to CrossFit with the chains. That's the analogy I always make, right? But no, as we just rest it right on the edge of that tire. No, everyone's like, wow, this is really cool. People are taking pictures, thumbs up. I've had people that I've just met randomly. I'm like, jump in, I'll give you a launch. We do a WTF launch. It's an experience for people, and I really love that about it. And I love how wide it is and how the weight's down low, where you can drive this giant truck and like do stupid stuff with it and have no risk of rolling over or a feeling of instability. I mean, it's just rock steady. So props to the GM team. Can't say enough good things about this. You know, certainly there's a time and place, and that's most of it, for efficient, affordable electric vehicles. But I think we need showcase vehicles to say that electric can be cool, it can be different, it can be better, and it can do things that combustion can't. And that's what this is a showcase of. It's not a showcase of efficiency. If they wanted to do that, they could build that. If it's not a showcase of luxury, if they wanted to build that, they could do that. It's amazing how much steering lock you have to put in, just because there's so much room left in that tire. just the way that it comes out of a corner as you get a lot of that rear motor up, the front end comes up, power starts flying everywhere because of the open diff up there. It's just incredible. It's incredibly crazy, and I love it. So thanks for watching another out of spec reviews video. We'll end it with some tire squeal, little lift off oversteer. You could just be a hooligan in this thing. Thanks for watching. See you in another one soon. Wow, I've really fallen in love with this, and it makes my Rivian feel like a Matchbox toy. Bye-bye.